At 900 on February 19, 1945, Corporal Tony Stein squeezed a homemade trigger and unleashed 1,200 rounds per minute into a Japanese pillbox on Iwo Jima. The concrete structure disintegrated. 3 enemy soldiers died instantly. The weapon roaring in his hands was not standard military issue. It was a salvaged aircraft machine gun that his sergeant had called a stupid idea 3 months earlier. 23 years old, 6 combat missions, 0 conventional kills. And within the next 8 hours, this toolmaker from Dayton, Ohio, would destroy more enemy positions than entire platoons, save 9 wounded Marines by carrying them barefoot through volcanic ash, and kill at least 20 Japanese defenders with a weapon he had built from scraps in a maintenance shed. The Marines around him were pinned down. Mortar rounds exploded in the black sand. Machine gun fire raked every position. Men were dying because they could not see where the bullets were coming from. But Tony Stein stood up, fully upright, in the middle of a beach where Japanese gunners had overlapping fields of fire designed to kill everything that moved. He needed them to shoot at him. He needed to see their muzzle flashes, and when he did, his improvised weapon would make them regret ever pulling the trigger. This is the story of how one man's forbidden invention changed the mathematics of combat on the deadliest beach in Marine Corps history. The problem began long before Iwo Jima. The standard-issue Browning M1919 machine gun was effective for defense. It fired 400 rounds per minute with reliable accuracy. But it weighed 31 pounds empty. Add the tripod and ammunition, and a machine gun crew was carrying over 50 pounds of equipment. Good for holding a position, terrible for assault. In the island-hopping campaign across the Pacific, Marines faced a tactical nightmare. Japanese defenders had spent months fortifying every position with interlocking fields of fire. Pillboxes were camouflaged with volcanic rock and sand. Spider holes appeared without warning. Tunnel systems connected positions underground, allowing enemy soldiers to retreat from one bunker and emerge from another. When one position was destroyed, fire came from 3 more directions. The traditional approach required Marines to identify enemy positions, call for tank or naval gunfire support, wait for the barrage to lift, and then advance. But tanks got stuck in soft terrain. Naval shells could not hit what observers could not see, and every minute spent waiting gave Japanese defenders time to reposition. The 5th Marine Division had trained for this assault for months. They knew Iwo Jima would be brutal. Intelligence estimated 21,000 Japanese defenders on an island barely 8 square miles. That was over 2,600 enemy soldiers per square mile. The entire island had been transformed into a fortress, with 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, 361 artillery positions, and more than 800 pillboxes. Every approach was covered. Every beach was a killing ground. Military planners expected 15,000 American casualties. They were wrong. The actual number would exceed 26,000 killed and wounded. Iwo Jima became the only Pacific battle where American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties. Something was fundamentally broken in the assault equation. The Marines had courage. They had training. They had naval and air superiority. What they did not have was a weapon that could keep pace with advancing riflemen while delivering enough firepower to suppress fortified positions. But everything was about to change because of one man nobody had noticed. Tony Stein was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1921 to Austrian Jewish immigrants who had fled anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. His father worked in a factory. His mother raised 6 children in a small house where money was always tight. Tony dropped out of high school during the Depression to help support his family. He found work at Patterson Field as a machinist, then moved to Delo Products as a tool and die maker. He understood machines the way some people understand music. He could look at a mechanism and see how it worked, how it failed, and how it could be improved. Tolerances and clearances made sense to him. Metal spoke a language he understood. When he joined the Marines in September 1942, that mechanical intuition went with him. Stein volunteered for the Paramarines, an elite unit that combined airborne training with amphibious assault capabilities. On Bougainville in 1943, he killed 5 Japanese snipers in a single day. But it was not his combat performance that caught attention. It was his habit of modifying equipment. He adjusted weapons. He improved mechanisms. He fixed things that were not technically broken because he could see ways to make them better. Sergeant Mel Grevich noticed this tendency. Grevich was an armorer who had been experimenting with something unusual. During the Bougainville campaign, he had salvaged an AN-M2 aircraft machine gun from a crashed Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber. The plane was destroyed, but the gun was intact. The AN-M2 was designed for aerial combat. It weighed only 21 pounds, 10 pounds lighter than the infantry M1919. More importantly, it could fire between 1,200 and 1,500 rounds per minute, 3 times faster than the standard ground weapon. In 5 seconds, it could deliver more bullets than an M1919 could fire in 15. But there was a problem that seemed impossible to solve. The AN-M2 had spade grips designed for aircraft mounts. No stock, no sights. No way for a single Marine to carry it, aim it, and fire accurately while advancing. It was a weapon built for a pilot in a cockpit, not an infantryman on a beach. When the Paramarines were disbanded in early 1944, both Grevich and Stein were reassigned to the 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division. They were training at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii for an operation the brass would not name yet, but everyone knew it would be ugly. One evening in November 1944, Grevich showed Stein the salvaged aircraft gun. Most Marines would have seen junk. Stein saw potential. The idea was insane. Take a weapon designed for 300-mile-per-hour slipstreams and turn it into a ground assault gun. Build a stock from scratch. Fabricate a trigger mechanism from sheet metal. Add sights that were never meant for the weapon. Create something the Marine Corps had never authorized, never tested, and never approved. Other Marines called it crazy. One sergeant said the barrel would melt after 2 magazines. A platoon commander said only an idiot would carry a plain gun into an infantry fight. The improvised trigger would jam. The modified stock would break. The whole contraption would fall apart the moment it was fired in anger. Stein did not argue with them. He simply went to work. They operated at night in a maintenance shed, using tools that were technically assigned for other purposes. Stein cut down an M1 Garand buttstock and hollowed it out to accept the machine gun's buffer tube. He fabricated a solenoid trigger mechanism from sheet metal scraps, bending and filing until the mechanism was smooth enough to fire reliably. Grevich welded a Browning automatic rifle bipod to the front for stability. They added BAR rear sights for aiming. The result was crude, 25 pounds total, fed by a 100-round ammunition box, capable of emptying that box in 5 seconds of continuous fire. They called it the Stinger. The first test firing changed everything. Stein took the weapon to the range and aimed at a target 200 yards downrange. He squeezed the trigger. The Stinger roared to life with a sound unlike any infantry weapon. In under 6 seconds, the entire 100-round box was empty. The target was destroyed. The skeptics went quiet. The sergeants who had laughed stopped laughing. The officers who had dismissed the project started paying attention. Company commanders approved it. Battalion approved it. Stein built 6 Stingers total, 1 for each of Company A's 3 rifle platoons, 1 for the demolition section, 1 for Grevich, and 1 for himself. The weapon that everyone said would fail was going to war. But building the Stinger was the easy part. The real test would come on a volcanic island 750 miles south of Tokyo, where 21,000 Japanese soldiers waited in tunnels and bunkers, where every meter of beach was covered by overlapping fields of fire, and where the black volcanic sand would turn red with American blood. On the morning of February 19, 1945, Tony Stein climbed down a cargo net into a landing craft with the Stinger slung across his back. Around him, Marines checked their weapons and tried not to think about the statistics. The first wave, the deadliest position. The men who would hit the beach before anyone knew what they were facing. As the landing craft approached the shore, Stein could see Mount Suribachi rising 550 feet above the southern tip of the island. Japanese observers on that summit could see everything. Every boat, every Marine, every movement on the beach below. The ramp dropped. Stein charged into the surf. The volcanic sand was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not sand at all. It was ash. Loose, terraced, impossible to run through. His boots sank 3 inches with every stride. Marines around him were struggling, stumbling, falling. Then the Japanese opened fire. Machine guns raked the beach from camouflaged positions. Mortar rounds began falling. The carefully planned assault dissolved into chaos within minutes. Marines dove for cover in shallow depressions, pinned down by fire they could not see. The first tanks were already bogged down in the soft ash. Naval gunfire was useless against targets the ships could not locate. Within hours, the 5th Marine Division had lost 43 men. By mid-morning, dead Marines lay scattered across the terrace beach, their bodies twisted in the volcanic ash. The assault was stalling before it had truly begun. Tony Stein was among the first men from Company A to establish a position beyond the beach. He looked at the chaos around him. He looked at the Stinger in his hands. He had built this weapon for exactly this moment. A moment when standard equipment was not enough. A moment when Marines were dying because they could not generate enough firepower to suppress enemy positions. He made a decision that would have gotten him killed if the Stinger had failed. He stood up, fully upright, completely exposed to enemy fire. He needed the Japanese to shoot at him. He needed to see where they were hiding. Bullets snapped past his head. Mortar rounds detonated in the ash nearby. And then Stein saw it. A pillbox 75 yards northwest. Camouflaged with volcanic rock. The barrel of a Type 92 heavy machine gun protruding just inches from the firing slit. He raised the Stinger, aimed at the position, and squeezed the solenoid trigger. The weapon roared at 1,200 rounds per minute. The pillbox disintegrated under the torrent of .30 caliber rounds. The Type 92 fell silent. Stein shifted his aim to a second pillbox, 40 yards to the left. Another burst. 5 seconds of continuous fire. That position went silent too. Around Stein, Marines began to move. The assault was alive again. In the next 8 hours, Corporal Tony Stein would make 8 trips between the beach and his platoon, carrying wounded Marines to safety and returning with ammunition. He would destroy more than 15 enemy positions. He would run barefoot through volcanic ash when his boots fell apart. And the weapon that everyone said would fail would prove itself in the most brutal combat the Marine Corps had ever seen. But February 19th was only the beginning. The battle for Iwo Jima would last 36 days. Mount Suribachi still loomed over the beach. 21,000 Japanese defenders still waited in their tunnels. And the Stinger that had performed so brilliantly on day one was already showing signs of damage. The barrel was discolored from heat. The trigger mechanism was starting to stick. And somewhere on that volcanic island, a Japanese sniper was watching the barefoot Marine who kept making impossible runs across open ground. In Part 2, we will see how Tony Stein pushed his improvised weapon beyond its limits, how a single bullet changed everything, and why the Marines would call him the bravest man on Iwo Jima. In the first hour of combat on Iwo Jima, Corporal Tony Stein had destroyed 5 enemy positions with a weapon everyone said would fail. The Stinger roared at 1,200 rounds per minute. Japanese pillboxes disintegrated under its fire. Marines who had been pinned down were moving again. But the improvised aircraft gun had one critical weakness that threatened to destroy everything Stein had accomplished. It was hungry. Impossibly hungry. 100 rounds disappeared in 5 seconds of trigger time. And on a beach where ammunition resupply meant crossing 200 yards of open ground under enemy fire, that hunger could get a man killed. Stein looked down at the empty ammunition box. The Stinger had just silenced its 5th pillbox. Around him, Company A was advancing for the first time since hitting the beach. But his weapon was useless without bullets. The resupply point was near the waterline, where landing craft were still unloading under sporadic mortar fire. He started running. The volcanic ash made every step a nightmare. It was not like normal sand. The terrain was loose, terraced, and gave way underfoot. Marines called it running through ball bearings. Stein's boots sank 3 inches with each stride. His legs burned. His lungs screamed for air. Japanese mortars bracketed the beach, sending geysers of black ash into the sky. Halfway to the waterline, he passed a wounded Marine. Private First Class from 2nd Platoon. Shrapnel wound to the left leg. The man was conscious but could not walk. He would die on that beach if someone did not move him. Stein grabbed him, slung him over his shoulder, kept running. The Marine weighed 160 pounds. The Stinger weighed 25. Combat Pack added another 30. Tony Stein was carrying over 215 pounds through volcanic ash while Japanese mortars tried to kill him. He reached the supply point at 0945. Corman took the wounded man. Stein grabbed 4 ammunition boxes and turned back toward his platoon. The return trip took 3 minutes. Japanese snipers had started targeting Marines moving between the beach and forward positions. Bullets kicked up black ash around his boots. A mortar round detonated 30 yards to his right. Shrapnel whistled past his head. He did not stop. When he reached Company A's position, his platoon sergeant pointed to a 3rd pillbox, larger than the others, reinforced concrete. A Type 96 light machine gun covering the approach to the airfield. 2 previous assaults had failed. 4 Marines lay dead in front of it. Stein loaded a fresh ammunition box into the Stinger. The weapon was already hot from previous engagements. The thin aircraft barrel was designed to be cooled by 300-mile-per-hour slipstreams during dive-bombing runs. On the ground, there was no airflow, just heat building with every burst. He stood up and advanced on the pillbox alone. The Type 96 opened fire immediately. Rounds snapped past his head and chest. Stein kept walking forward. At 50 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The Stinger's rate of fire was so overwhelming that the Japanese gunner could not adjust fast enough. Rounds found the firing slit. The enemy gun went silent. Stein charged the final 20 yards and dropped a grenade through the opening. The explosion killed the three-man crew inside. He turned back to reload. The ammunition box was empty again. He had been in combat for 46 minutes and had already gone through 300 rounds. Second trip to the beach. This time he found two wounded Marines on the way down. One had a sucking chest wound. The other had lost part of his right hand to shrapnel. Stein could not carry both. He took the chest wound case first, ran him to the corpsman, grabbed more ammunition, made a third trip specifically to retrieve the second wounded man. By 10:30 hours, Stein had made 4 trips to the beach and back. Each time he carried a wounded Marine to safety. Each time he returned with ammunition. His platoon had advanced 200 yards inland. They had destroyed 7 enemy positions, and Stein had personally killed at least 15 Japanese soldiers. But the Stinger was suffering. The barrel was discolored from heat. Purple and brown streaks marked where the thin steel had been pushed beyond its design limits. The solenoid trigger mechanism was starting to stick. Stein had fabricated it from sheet metal in Hawaii. While it worked, it was not as reliable as factory equipment. Sometimes it fired one round when he wanted a burst. He had to tap it with his palm to reset. And his boots were disintegrating. The volcanic ash was destroying the leather. The soles were nearly gone, cracked and torn. Running in them was becoming painful. Every step sent sharp pains through his arches. The boots were slowing him down, adding friction, costing precious seconds on every run. Stein made a decision that seemed insane. He unlaced his boots and kicked them off, barefoot in volcanic ash. The decision defied every piece of military training, but Stein understood mathematics. Every second counted. The ash was abrasive, but not unbearably hot in shaded areas. Without the rigid boot soles, he could actually feel the terrain and adjust his stride. He also removed his helmet. The M1 steel pot weighed 2.5 pounds. Combined with the boots, he was shedding nearly 5 pounds of equipment. 5 pounds that would let him move faster between the beach and his platoon. His 5th run to the beach took 2 minutes and 40 seconds, faster than any previous trip. His feet sank into the ash, but without boots, he could gain traction. It was painful. The coarse volcanic material was like running on broken glass. But it was faster. He grabbed another wounded Marine on the way down. Shrapnel to the abdomen. Unconscious. Stein carried him over his shoulder, delivered him to the corpsman, loaded up on ammunition, and ran back to Company A. By 1100 hours, Stein had made 6 trips. 6 wounded Marines evacuated. 600 rounds of ammunition delivered. His platoon had advanced 300 yards from the beach. They were approaching the first airfield. Japanese resistance was intensifying. The enemy had constructed a defensive network that seemed impossible to break. Pillboxes, spider holes, underground bunkers connected by tunnels. When one position was destroyed, soldiers emerged from another location and resumed firing. It was like fighting an enemy that could teleport. The Stinger was the only weapon in Company A that could suppress multiple positions simultaneously. When Stein opened fire, the sheer sound of 1,200 rounds per minute made adjacent positions hesitate. That hesitation gave riflemen time to advance. At 11:20 hours, Stein's platoon encountered a reinforced bunker that had stopped 2 other companies. Concrete walls, 3 firing slits, multiple Type 96 machine guns inside, with interlocking fields of fire. Tank destroyers had tried to knock it out. Both were hit by concealed anti-tank guns. An airstrike missed by 50 yards. The bunker remained operational. Marines were dying in front of it. Stein studied the position. The firing slits were narrow, maybe 8 inches wide and 4 inches tall. Difficult targets. But the Stinger's rate of fire meant that if he aimed at a slit and held the trigger, statistically, some rounds would get through. He advanced alone. At 50 yards, he went prone and opened fire. The Stinger emptied its 100-round box in 7 seconds. At that range, at least 30 rounds went through the firing slits. The Japanese guns inside fell silent. Stein reloaded and charged the bunker. He dropped grenades through the slits. 5 enemy soldiers died inside. Company A's advance resumed. His 7th trip to the beach came at 11:50 hours. This time he carried a Marine who had lost both legs below the knee to a mine. The man was still conscious, screaming. Stein ran the entire 200 yards, while the Marine bled into his uniform. The corpsman said later that if Stein had been 30 seconds slower, the man would have died from blood loss. On the return trip, Stein encountered another Marine carrying a Stinger, one of Grevich's other gunners from Company G. His weapon had jammed permanently. The barrel had warped from overheating. He was carrying it back to see if an armorer could fix it. Stein looked at his own Stinger. The barrel was discolored purple. The wooden furniture on the Garand stock was starting to char. The bipod was loose, but it still fired. Barely. 8th trip at 12:30 hours. Another wounded Marine, another load of ammunition. Other Marines had started to notice the barefoot corporal making repeated runs under fire. Some thought he was crazy. Others thought he was the bravest man on Iwo Jima. Stein did not think about bravery. He thought about mathematics. His platoon needed ammunition. Wounded men needed evacuation. He was faster without boots. The Stinger gave him firepower to suppress positions while he moved. Everything else was just execution. But on his 8th return trip, everything changed. A Japanese sniper had moved into position overlooking the supply route. As Stein ran back toward Company A round snapped past his head. Close. Maybe 6 inches. He dropped flat in the volcanic ash. The Stinger landed beside him. For the first time that day, Tony Stein was pinned down. The sniper was good, patient, disciplined, trained to wait hours for a single high-value target. And a Marine making repeated trips across open ground was definitely high value. Stein lay motionless for 30 seconds, controlled his breathing. The sniper was watching for movement, any movement. Another round cracked overhead. The shooter was firing at where Stein had been, not where he was. That meant the sniper had not acquired his exact position yet. He had maybe 10 seconds. Stein rolled left, grabbed the Stinger, and came up running. Not toward his platoon, toward the sniper. The mathematics were simple. Running perpendicular to the sniper's line of sight made him a harder target than running away. And if he could close the distance, 1,200 rounds per minute would overwhelm a bolt-action rifle. 3 more shots, all misses. Stein was sprinting barefoot through volcanic ash with the Stinger in his hands. At 150 yards, he saw movement. A figure in a spider hole, partially concealed by volcanic rock. He dropped to one knee and opened fire. The Stinger roared. The rock and surrounding terrain disintegrated. When the ammunition box ran empty, there was no return fire. Stein approached the position carefully. The sniper was dead. A Type 97 rifle lay beside him. By 1300 hours, when Stein reached his platoon, Company A had been pinned down by a complex of 8 pillboxes arranged in a semicircle. Interlocking fields of fire. 12 casualties in 20 minutes. Tanks were still stuck near the beach. Artillery support was limited. Stein moved to the forward position and assessed. The 8 pillboxes formed an arc 100 yards ahead. Japanese soldiers moved through connecting trenches. It was not static defense. It was a coordinated system designed to kill. He stood up and opened fire on the leftmost pillbox. 5-second burst. The position went silent. He shifted aim. Another burst. Silence. He was methodically working across the arc, suppressing each position in sequence. Japanese soldiers in the trenches fired back. Rounds kicked up ash around his feet. One bullet struck the Stinger's barrel with a metallic clang. The weapon kept firing. By 13:30 hours, Company A had broken through. 5 pillboxes destroyed. 17 Japanese confirmed dead. The advance continued. But then something happened that Stein had trained for, but hoped would never occur. During the assault on the 6th pillbox, a Type 96 machine gun scored a direct hit on the Stinger. The weapon was ripped from his hands and thrown 6 feet backward. Stein dove for cover. He was now unarmed. The damaged Stinger lay in open ground between his position and the active enemy pillbox. Japanese soldiers had seen it fall. They knew he was disarmed. They were waiting. Tony Stein looked at the weapon lying in the ash. It might not even fire anymore. The belt feed was probably destroyed. But he had carried that gun through 8 trips to the beach. It had kept his platoon alive. He sprinted into the open. The Japanese machine gun opened fire. Rounds snapped past his head. 3 seconds to reach the Stinger. He grabbed it, rolled behind cover, and checked the weapon. The belt feed was jammed. He cleared it with his fingers, loaded a fresh box, test fired. It worked. He stood up and emptied the entire box into the pillbox that had shot his weapon from his hands. 100 rounds in 7 seconds. The position was obliterated. By 1400 hours, Company A had advanced 400 yards from the beach. 23 enemy positions destroyed. 9 wounded Marines saved. The Stinger was critically damaged, but still firing. And then the weapon was hit again. In Part 3, we will see how Tony Stein fought with a dying weapon, why he made a decision that shocked the entire Marine Corps, and what happened when a Japanese grenade landed 3 feet from his position on the slopes of Mount Suribachi. A tool maker from Dayton built a weapon from salvaged aircraft parts. In 8 hours of combat, he destroyed 23 enemy positions, saved 9 wounded Marines, and ran barefoot through volcanic ash while carrying men twice his weight. The Stinger had proven itself on the deadliest beach in Marine Corps history. But now, at 14:30 hours on February 19th, the weapon that everyone said would fail was dying. And the battle for Iwo Jima was just beginning. The second bullet struck the Stinger's receiver with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. The impact knocked the weapon from Stein's hands for the second time that day. It landed 10 feet away in a shell crater. Stein was completely exposed. No cover, no weapon. Japanese soldiers in the trench system were firing rifles and throwing grenades. He could see at least 6 enemy combatants. Stein ran for the Stinger. A grenade exploded 5 yards behind him. Volcanic ash and shrapnel filled the air. Fragments hit his left leg and back. Small wounds. Painful, but not incapacitating. He grabbed the weapon and dove into the crater. The receiver had a deep gouge where the bullet had struck. Stein cycled the action manually. Stiff, but functional. He loaded a fresh belt and aimed at the trench. The Stinger fired. Barely. The rate of fire was down to maybe 600 rounds per minute. half its original capability. But 600 rounds per minute was still faster than anything else on the battlefield. Stein suppressed the trench while riflemen advanced with grenades. 6 Japanese soldiers died. Company A's advance continued. By 1500 hours, Stein had fired over 2,000 rounds. His feet were bloody from running barefoot through volcanic ash. His uniform was soaked with sweat and the blood of wounded men he had carried. And the Stinger was barely functional. The barrel was bent at a 5-degree angle. The stock was held together by friction and hope. The solenoid trigger fired randomly, sometimes 1 round, sometimes 5, sometimes nothing. Stein had to manually cycle the action between bursts. But Company A had reached its objective. They were at the base of Mount Suribachi. The volcanic peak dominated the southern tip of Iwo Jima, 550 feet above sea level. Japanese observers on the summit could see every American position on the beach. Artillery spotters directed fire from the heights. The mountain had to be taken. But the enemy had fortified it with over 60 pillboxes, bunkers, and cave positions. Every approach was covered. At 1700 hours, Stein's platoon was ordered to establish a defensive perimeter and hold overnight. The assault on Suribachi would begin the next morning. For now, Company A needed to consolidate and prepare for counterattacks. Stein finally had time to assess his own condition. His feet were torn and bleeding. Volcanic ash had worked into every cut, turning them into infected wounds. Shrapnel fragments remained in his left calf and lower back. His hands were blistered from carrying the hot Stinger. He had been in continuous combat for 8 hours. He had run approximately 3 miles across those 8 trips to the beach. The Stinger lay beside him in the fighting hole, destroyed. The barrel needed replacement. The receiver was damaged. The stock was burned. The trigger mechanism was unreliable. But it had done its job. That night, Japanese infiltrators began probing Company A's perimeter. Small groups, testing defenses, looking for weak points. Stein grabbed the damaged Stinger. Despite everything, it still had one advantage: volume of fire. When a Japanese soldier appeared 30 yards from his position, Stein fired a burst. The weapon worked. The infiltrator died. By dawn on February 20th, Stein had been awake for 22 consecutive hours. The assault on Mount Suribachi began at 0800. Company A and the rest of the 28th Marines started climbing the volcanic slopes. The terrain was brutal. Loose ash, no vegetation. Exposed ridges where Japanese observers tracked every movement. The enemy had spent months preparing these defenses. They had stockpiled ammunition and water inside the mountain's tunnel system. They intended to make Americans pay for every yard. An armorer had worked on the Stinger overnight. The barrel was still bent, but a new belt feed mechanism had been installed. The trigger was more reliable. The weapon would fire, but it was no longer the devastating tool it had been on day 1. At 0930 hours, Company A encountered a reinforced bunker complex halfway up the southern slope. 4 concrete bunkers connected by trenches, multiple machine gun positions, mortar crews firing from concealed pits. The advance stalled. Stein moved forward with the Stinger. He identified the primary bunker and opened fire. The damaged barrel reduced accuracy, but at close range, volume still mattered. He suppressed the position long enough for demolition teams to move forward with satchel charges. The bunker was destroyed. Company A advanced another 50 yards. At 10:15 hours, Stein's luck changed. A Japanese grenade landed 3 feet from his position. He saw it. A small, olive-colored cylinder sitting in the volcanic ash. Time seemed to stop. He tried to move. His legs pushed against the ground. His body twisted away from the explosive. The grenade detonated before he could get clear. Shrapnel hit his right arm, right leg, and torso. Multiple wounds, none immediately fatal, but he was bleeding heavily. Corpsmen reached him within minutes. They bandaged the wounds and called for evacuation. Stein refused. His platoon was still engaged. The stinger was still needed. He continued fighting. For the next 2 hours, Stein provided fire support while bleeding through his bandages. Every time a pillbox opened fire on advancing Marines, he suppressed it. Every time Japanese soldiers appeared in trench systems, he cut them down with sustained bursts. But by 12:30 hours, his wounds had worsened. Significant blood loss. Lightheaded. Vision narrowing. The corpsman told him he needed immediate evacuation, or he would die on the mountain. This time, Stein did not argue. He handed the stinger to another Marine in his squad and allowed the corpsman to carry him down the mountain to the beach. From there, he was loaded onto a landing craft and transported to a hospital ship anchored offshore. On February 21st, while Stein recovered on the hospital ship, the 28th Marines continued their assault. The fighting was savage. Every cave had to be cleared with flamethrowers and explosives. Every trench taken in close combat. Japanese soldiers fought to the death rather than surrender. On February 23rd, at 10:20 hours, a patrol from Company E reached the summit of Mount Suribachi. They raised a small American flag. Photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the moment. Later that afternoon, a larger flag was raised. That image became the most iconic photograph of the Pacific War. Stein was not present for the flag raising. He was on the hospital ship, receiving treatment. Doctors removed shrapnel from his arm, leg, and torso. They treated him for blood loss and infection. They told him he would be sent to a rear area hospital. His war was over. But on February 25th, news reached the hospital ship that hit Stein harder than any grenade. The 5th Marine Division had moved north from Suribachi toward the center of the island. They were assaulting Hill 362A. The fighting was brutal. The 28th Marines were taking catastrophic casualties. Company A had lost 30% of its strength in 2 days. Stein's platoon sergeant was dead. His squad leader was dead. Marines he had trained with in Hawaii were dying on a nameless hill. On February 26th, against medical orders, Tony Stein left the hospital ship. He climbed into a landing craft, returning to the beach. He told the boat crew he had been cleared to return to duty. He had not been cleared. He was technically AWOL from the hospital ship. But nobody stopped him. He reached the beach at 1400 hours, found a supply sergeant, and requisitioned new boots. His feet were still bandaged, but he could walk. He grabbed an M1 Garand from a supply dump. The stinger was gone, either destroyed or being used by another Marine. It did not matter. Tony Stein was going back to his unit. He walked north across Iwo Jima, 6 miles, through volcanic ash and past destroyed Japanese positions, past burned-out tanks and scattered equipment, past graves registration teams collecting American dead. He reached Company A's position at Hill 362A on February 27th. The company had been reduced to 63 men from its original strength of 240. The survivors were exhausted. 8 days of continuous fighting. No rest, no relief. Just endless combat against an enemy that refused to surrender. Stein reported to the company commander. He was put back on the line immediately. Company A needed every rifle. For the next 2 days, Stein fought in brutal, close-quarters combat around Hill 362A. No stinger, just an M1 Garand and grenades. The fighting was different without the improvised machine gun. Slower, more deliberate. But Stein was still effective. On March 1st, 1945, Company A was tasked with a reconnaissance patrol to locate Japanese pillboxes that had been harassing the regiment's advance. 19 Marines. Corporal Tony Stein was designated Assistant Patrol Leader. Their mission was simple: move forward approximately 400 yards, locate enemy positions, return with intelligence. No assault, just reconnaissance. At 0700 hours, the patrol moved out. The terrain was volcanic ridges and ravines, perfect for ambush. Japanese soldiers had established concealed positions throughout the area. Snipers, machine gun nests, mortar teams, all hidden in caves and spider holes. The patrol moved slowly. 20 yards. Stop. Observe. Listen. 20 more yards. The Marines knew Japanese defenders were watching them. The question was when the enemy would open fire. At 0745 hours, the patrol reached a ridgeline overlooking a small valley. Stein moved to the front to get a better view of the terrain ahead. Through volcanic rock formations, he could see what looked like camouflaged positions, possibly pillboxes, possibly cave entrances. The patrol needed to move closer to confirm. Stein signaled the patrol to advance. He stepped forward, M1 Garand at the ready. His feet, still bandaged from the barefoot runs 8 days earlier, ached with every step. The shrapnel wounds in his right arm and leg had not fully healed, but he moved forward because that was what needed to be done. At 0752 hours, a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Tony Stein in the head. He dropped instantly. The shot came from a concealed position approximately 200 yards northeast, a spider hole or cave entrance. The patrol could not see the shooter. Corpsmen reached Stein within seconds. There was nothing they could do. The wound was fatal. Corporal Tony Stein, aged 23, died on the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima at 0753 hours on March 1st, 1945. The patrol returned fire toward the suspected sniper position. Marines called in mortar support. The area was saturated with high explosives. Whether the sniper died was never confirmed. Japanese soldiers rarely left bodies where Americans could find them. The patrol completed its mission. They identified the pillbox complex and returned to Company A with the intelligence. But they carried Tony Stein's body back with them. News of his death spread quickly through the 28th Marines. The barefoot corporal. The Marine who made 8 trips under fire. The toolmaker who built a weapon from salvaged aircraft parts and used it to destroy more enemy positions than anyone could count. On March 2nd, Stein was buried in the 5th Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima. A simple wooden cross marked his grave, his service number, his rank, his unit. No mention of the Stinger. No mention of the Medal of Honor that would later bear his name. In Part 4, we will see how Tony Stein's legacy was honored, why his improvised weapon became legend in Marine Corps history, and the final tribute that proved a toolmaker from Ohio had changed warfare forever. A toolmaker from Dayton built a weapon everyone said would fail. He used it to destroy 23 enemy positions on the deadliest beach in Marine Corps history. He ran barefoot through volcanic ash to save 9 wounded Marines. He returned from a hospital ship against medical orders because his brothers were dying. And on March 1st, 1945, a Japanese sniper's bullet ended his life on a volcanic ridge. Tony Stein was 23 years old. But this story does not end with a wooden cross in a cemetery on Iwo Jima. Because the barefoot corporal left behind something more powerful than any weapon. He left behind a legend that would echo through Marine Corps history for the next 80 years. In May 1945, 2 months after Stein's death, Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson submitted a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. The document detailed everything: the 8 trips to the beach, the wounded Marines evacuated under fire, the enemy positions destroyed with an improvised aircraft gun, the barefoot runs through volcanic ash, the refusal to seek medical treatment, the return from the hospital ship. Every officer in the chain of command endorsed the recommendation. Regiment, Division, Fleet Marine Force, Pacific Command. The after-action reports told a story that seemed impossible. One man with a homemade weapon had done more damage to Japanese defenses than entire platoons with standard equipment. The recommendation concluded with a phrase that would be carved into military history. Corporal Tony Stein demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. On February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after Stein's actions on Iwo Jima, his widow Joan received his Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the Ohio State House. Governor Frank Lasche presented the medal. Joan stood in his office, overwhelmed by the weight of the decoration and the memories it represented. Tony's mother, Rose, attended the ceremony. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her daughter-in-law accept the nation's highest military honor on behalf of a son who would never come home. Rose had fled anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe decades earlier. She had raised 6 children in poverty during the Depression. And now her son, the high school dropout who had worked as a toolmaker, had received an honor that placed him among the most decorated warriors in American history. The Medal of Honor citation mentioned the personally improvised aircraft-type weapon, but it did not use the name Stinger. That name existed only in Marine Corps oral history, passed down from veteran to veteran, from instructor to recruit. The toolmaker who built a plane gun and used it to change the mathematics of combat. Tony Stein's remains stayed on Iwo Jima until 1948. In December of that year, his body was returned to Dayton for burial with full military honors. The ceremony at Our Lady of the Rosary Church drew hundreds of mourners. Veterans who had served with him, civilians who had never met him but understood what he represented. He was buried in Calvary Cemetery, the only Medal of Honor recipient from Dayton in World War II. But the real legacy of Tony Stein was not the medal on his widow's wall. It was the weapon he left behind. The 5 other Stingers built by Mel Grevich also saw combat on Iwo Jima. 2 were destroyed by enemy fire. 1 jammed permanently from overheating. The other 2 survived the battle, but were lost in the chaos of equipment disposal after the war. None of the original 6 Stingers exist today. They were field modifications, non-standard equipment, the kind of weapons the military typically destroys rather than preserves. But the idea survived. Marine Corps armorers studied the Stinger concept throughout the late 1940s. The principle was sound. Take aircraft weapons with high rates of fire and adapt them for ground combat. Reduce weight, increase firepower. Give individual Marines the ability to suppress enemy positions without waiting for crew-served weapons. The lessons influenced the development of the M60 machine gun in the 1950s. Designers focused on reducing weight while maintaining rate of fire. The M60 weighed 23 pounds, not as light as the Stinger, but significantly lighter than the M1919 it replaced. More importantly, 1 Marine could carry and fire it while advancing. In Vietnam, the principle evolved further. The M16 rifle, with its high-velocity 5.56 mm ammunition, allowed individual soldiers to carry more rounds. The M249 squad automatic weapon continued the trend of lighter, faster-firing infantry weapons. Each development carried echoes of what Stein and Grevich had figured out in a maintenance shed in Hawaii. In 1972, the United States Navy commissioned USS Stein, a Knox-class frigate, The ship served for 21 years, participating in operations across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. It was decommissioned in 1993 and eventually scrapped. But for 2 decades, a warship bearing Tony Stein's name patrolled the same waters where he had fought and died. At Paris Island, the recruit depot where new Marines begin their service, instructors teach about improvisation and adaptation in combat. Tony Stein's story is part of that curriculum, the toolmaker who saw a problem and built a solution, the Marine who kept fighting when standard equipment failed, the man who understood that in combat, mathematics matters more than regulations. Ian McCollum, of Forgotten Weapons, documented the Stinger's design and history for modern audiences. The Canadian Historical Arms Museum built a functional replica for educational purposes. That replica demonstrated what Stein and Grevich had accomplished with basic tools and mechanical knowledge. They had taken a weapon designed for 300-mile-per-hour slipstreams and turned it into a devastating ground assault gun. The lesson was not about the specific weapon, it was about the mindset. Throughout military history, the greatest innovations have often come from people the institution did not expect. Billy Mitchell was court-martialed for advocating air power. His ideas transformed modern warfare. Percy Hobart designed specialized tanks that the British Army initially rejected. Those tanks helped win D-Day. Barnes Wallis was told his bouncing bomb was impossible. It destroyed the Ruhr dams and crippled German industry. Tony Stein fit this pattern perfectly, a tool and die maker with no engineering degree. A high school dropout who understood machines better than most graduates. A corporal who solved a problem the colonels had ignored. The institution said his weapon would fail. The institution was wrong. This pattern repeats in every field. The experts who dismiss ideas from outsiders. The bureaucrats who prefer procedure over innovation. The leaders who cannot recognize genius when it comes from unexpected sources. Military history is filled with examples of good ideas rejected because they came from the wrong rank or the wrong background. But military history is also filled with examples of those ideas succeeding anyway, because someone was stubborn enough to build a prototype. Someone was brave enough to test it under fire. Someone was willing to be called crazy until the results proved otherwise. Tony Stein was that someone. There is one detail about the Stinger that most people do not know. The weapon that Stein carried on February 19th was not the first one he built. It was actually the 4th prototype. The first 3 had various problems: feeding issues, trigger malfunctions, balance problems that made accurate fire difficult. Stein had failed 3 times before he succeeded. Each failure taught him something. Each prototype was better than the last. By the time he built the version that went to Iwo Jima, he had refined every component. The failures were not setbacks. They were steps toward the weapon that would destroy 23 enemy positions and save 9 Marines. This is perhaps the most important lesson of all. Innovation is not a single moment of genius. It is a process of repeated failure, adjustment, and improvement. The experts who laughed at the first prototype never saw the 4th. They judged an idea by its earliest, weakest form. Stein kept working until the idea was strong enough to prove them wrong. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. Nearly 7,000 Americans died. 20,000 more were wounded. Japanese casualties were even worse. Of the 21,000 defenders, fewer than 1,000 survived. The island became a mass grave beneath volcanic ash. But on February 19th, during those first 8 hours of combat, Tony Stein and his improvised weapon made a difference that rippled through Marine Corps history. His barefoot runs saved Marines who would have bled out on the beach. His suppressive fire allowed advances that would otherwise have stalled. His mechanical ingenuity gave the Corps a weapon that for one day changed everything. From a toolmaker in Dayton with an idea everyone called insane, to the Medal of Honor and a legacy that still influences infantry tactics today, Tony Stein proved that courage and creativity can overcome any obstacle. That the best solutions sometimes come from the people institutions overlook. That a man with a salvaged aircraft gun and the will to use it can change the mathematics of war. And because of him, 9 Marines came home to their families. Dozens more survived advances that his weapon made possible. A generation of armorers learned that innovation matters more than regulation. A Navy ship carried his name across the oceans he helped secure. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about toolmakers and Marines who saved lives with salvaged aircraft guns and barefoot courage. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us if you know another story of military innovation that deserves to be told. Our community stretches across the entire world, and together, we keep these memories alive. Tony Stein was 23 years old when he died. He had been a Marine for 2 years and 5 months. He built a weapon from scraps, destroyed more enemy positions than anyone could count, and carried wounded men through volcanic ash with his bare feet bleeding. These men deserve to be remembered, and you just helped make that happen.